Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tucker, and today's continuation of the What's Next series covers the New Orleans Pelicans, and this season was certainly an eventful one for them. Going into it, they were faced with the same semi-rumors of a potential Anthony Davis trade request connected to his 2020 free agency that they dealt with for a few years now. But it all blew up for real this time, right before the trade deadline. It was made known to the organization that Davis did not plan on re-signing in New Orleans in 2020, and that he would like to be traded, preferably to LA or New York. As I talked about at the time, the fact that Davis requested to be moved wasn't a big surprise, but the timing of it was. His change in representation and other bits of context around the situation made it clear where his loyalties lied, and they weren't with the Pelicans. But to request a trade so close to the deadline, giving the franchise little time to go about the process of trading away one of the best players in the NBA properly. As a result, nothing really came out of his request, except that it actually did kind of tank the Lakers season, or at least was a factor in it, but the Pelicans decided not to trade away Davis despite LA's desperate attempts. And now they go into the offseason with that situation clearly in need of a resolution. After all that, the team finished with a 33-49 record, and to further complicate matters as it relates to the Anthony Davis trade, they have a new person in charge of the front office, former Cavs GM David Griffin. His tenure moving forward will be constantly connected to how he handles the Davis situation, and if it comes down to it, what kind of return he gets in a trade, which means there is a tremendous amount of pressure on him right away. And unfortunately for him, there don't appear to be that many building blocks on this team to start with. Obviously, there's Davis, who likely won't be on the team at the beginning of next season. Then there's Jrue Holiday, who's a really good player, but is 28 and is signed to a big deal that goes into his early 30s. And the rest of the roster are either free agents, such as Julius Randle, who's very likely to decline his $9 million player option this offseason, or mildly promising young players that they can't really count on turning into anything long-term at the moment, such as Jahlil Okafor. The positive here is that if they do trade Davis, the players and/or picks they get in return will provide a nice foundation to begin their rebuild with. Moving on to the draft, the Pelicans' lottery odds can be seen on screen, and they hold a 26% chance of getting a top 4 pick, and if it doesn't land in the top 4, it'll be anywhere between picks 7 through 11. Assuming that this is the only pick that the Pelicans have in this draft, aka they don't trade Davis for a top draft pick, then they can pretty much just pick the best player available no matter where they're drafted. Holiday can play the 1 or the 2, so they can look for help at either backcourt spot. They've needed help on the wings for years, and that is still the case, and even the front court might be a priority depending on what happens with Randle and Davis. As a result of that, and things being up in the air with the Davis trade, it doesn't really make much sense to try to project who they could draft, since literally any prospect could be available. So instead, I'm going to spend the rest of this video talking about the Pelicans free agency and possible Davis trades. If Julius Randle turns down his $9 million player option for next season, which he should, because he had a productive season and should be able to sign for more than that annually on a long-term deal, then the Pelicans would have about $82 million in payroll or $27 million in salary cap space. Now that number could change depending on a Davis trade and how much salary they take back, and it would be difficult to project how that would impact their salary cap moving forward, so I'm not really going to even attempt to do that. So again, just like everything else, their free agency situation ties into what they do with AD, but the way I see it, they have 3 basic options. 1, they could keep Anthony Davis and try to convince him to stay, risking him leaving in 2020 or just sitting out the entire season Kawhi Leonard style. But assuming he plays, they could bring back Randle for $12 to $13 million a year, use the remaining $14 to $15 million to bring in some help on the wing, such as Terrence Ross and Trevor Ariza, and try and push for a 6 to 8 seed in the West next season. If somehow they did convince Davis to play for them next year, the Pelicans are in the best salary cap situation they've been in a long time, and have a real chance at bringing in some help on the wings to help them push for the playoffs, in addition to whoever they draft. Now, if they get a top 4 pick, then that rookie salary would be significant and take up some of their cap space, but by some miracle, if they get a top 4 pick and convince AD to play for them next year, they could still have Holiday, E'Twaun Moore, RJ Barrett or DeAndre Hunter, for example, Randle and Davis, with somebody like Ariza or Ross providing wing depth off the bench. Depending on how healthy they are and how well they play, that's a pretty good team and would at least challenge for a playoff spot in the West, whatever that's worth to the franchise. That isn't a realistic or all that likely scenario in my opinion, but I don't think that it would be surprising for the Pelicans to at least attempt to try out this option. But if they do go ahead and trade Davis and go into a rebuild, which will be one of the options covered here in a second, it could signal the end of NBA basketball in New Orleans. It's a real possibility that this is the franchise that ends up getting moved to Seattle within the next few years, and that possibility only increases if Davis isn't there and the team isn't very good for the next few seasons, further motivating them to at least try and stay competitive with or without him. Which brings me to the next option, which does involve trading Davis, but still trying to remain competitive in the West. I don't want to spoil some of the trade specifics that are coming up in the next section, but let's just say that the Pelicans end up with a mid-lottery pick in this year's draft via trade, in addition to a promising young player and a veteran that is a high-quality starter in exchange for Davis, and they add that to their own draft pick, Holiday and more, bring back Randall, and bring in wing help with their cap space. That group might not have the same superstar level talent without Davis, obviously, but their depth would certainly be a strength, and they could challenge for a playoff spot in the West next season while simultaneously developing their 2 lottery picks. That doesn't sound like all that bad of an option either, and again, there's plenty of motivation to at least field a respectable and interesting team next year and moving forward post-Davis trade rather than completely going into tank mode. However, the third option would be exactly that. Trading away Davis, letting Randall walk, exploring trades for the long-term contract of Holiday, and hoping they strike gold with their own high draft pick and the one they'll probably get in a Davis trade, while going into the summer of 2020 with essentially a blank slate of cap space to build their team around their new young pieces. Now, in a typical scenario, this might be the obvious choice. However, for a team that is in the circumstances that the Pelicans are in, the typical choice might not be the right one. From a team building perspective, sure, tanking might allow them to create a really good team down the road in 2 to 3 years, but there's no guarantee that by that point, the team would still be located in New Orleans. Moving on from free agency now to looking at some possible Anthony Davis trade packages. The way I see it, there are 2 main teams to watch and one team that was in the picture a few months ago, but isn't really an option anymore. Let's begin with the Lakers, the team that in my opinion will be on the outside looking in on AD trades because essentially they already threw everything they could at the Pelicans at the trade deadline, but they weren't interested and the value of one of the key assets involved has decreased pretty dramatically, and that asset is Brandon Ingram. Ironically, he was actually playing extremely well after the trade deadline for the Lakers, but has since faced some health issues that leave his future in question. He will probably end up recovering just fine, but the Pelicans weren't interested in what the Lakers had to offer in the first place, and they aren't going to be any more interested in it now that Ingram is facing a recovery from a serious injury. The only hope here is that David Griffin values the Lakers package more than the previous front office did, but that's an unlikely thing to pin your hopes on as a Lakers fan. Moving on now to the 2 teams that are the front runners to potentially land Anthony Davis via trade this offseason, in my opinion, the Boston Celtics and the New York Knicks. The Celtics have long been rumored to covet pairing Davis with Kyrie Irving, and with more rumors every day that Irving is seriously considering leaving Boston this offseason, they'll be that much more motivated to try and get a deal done. In the past, I've questioned the Celtics' willingness to actually include Jason Tatum in a Davis trade, despite reports that they would, but given how the events of the last few months have played out as it relates to Irving, I don't really see that as much of an issue anymore. And I really don't think they'd hesitate to include Tatum in the package now if it meant it secured Kyrie's long-term commitment as well by bringing in Davis. Here's what I have in mind. Jason Tatum, Terry Rozier is a sign-and-trade on a 4-year, $44 million deal, Aaron Baines for salary matching purposes, and a combination of draft picks. The selections in play here are the 20th pick they received from the Clippers, the Kings pick, which they already have unless it lands at number 1 overall, which it won't, and is a 95% chance of being 14th, and a Memphis pick that is top 8 protected, which has a 43% chance of being outside of the top 8 and conveying to the Celtics this year. This video is being made before the draft lottery, so let's just say for simplicity's sake that the Celtics end up with all 3 of these picks, and the Memphis pick lands at number 9. Then the full trade offer from the Celtics could be the players I mentioned plus 2 lottery picks, 9 and 14, and a late first round pick at number 20, giving the Pelicans 4 selections within the top 20 of this draft. These 3 plus their own, along with Tatum and Rozier. Now that would be a gigantic offer from Boston, but again, their motivation should be high to bring in Davis to secure the long-term commitment of Irving. There are other combinations of this that swap out Jaylen Brown for Tatum or don't include all of the picks, but this offer gives you an idea of just what the Celtics could have available to send to New Orleans. Moving on now to the Knicks, things are much less complicated for them. They're guaranteed a top 5 pick with as good a chance as any team of getting the number 1 overall pick and the chance to select Zion Williamson. They could send that pick or the player selected with it after the draft to the Pelicans in addition to Kevin Knox, Mitchell Robinson, Alonzo Trier, and Dennis Smith Jr. as well if they chose to. Now obviously the value of that pick depends a lot on where it falls, and the difference between number 1 and number 5, for example, is huge, but depending on what other teams put on the table, the Knicks have a competitive package to send to New Orleans. That would give them 2 top 7 picks plus those 4 young guys to build their team around in the post-AD era. Now, when you compare the 2 best-case scenario trade packages from Boston and New York, you can see that both of these are gigantic offers from both sides. And even though I wouldn't necessarily anticipate these exact offers being on the table, I do think each of these teams will be highly motivated to make a deal happen. And when you consider the assets available for each team, that could result in some really high value offers coming the Pelicans' way. And in many ways, these teams are competing against each other for more than just Davis. If Irving does leave the Celtics this summer, it's very likely going to be for the Knicks, who could sign him and Kevin Durant, then send this package to the Pelicans for Davis and create a true super team. While on the other hand, the Celtics are trying to consolidate some of their young players and assets into another star to convince Irving to stick around. In the end, I'm sure each of you guys will have a ton of opinions on which trade package is better and what is fair value in exchange for Davis, and I can't wait to see those and have discussions with you guys in the comments section below. And there you have it. That is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.